It's Mongol time. So, before we do our deep dive on the Mongol Empire, you might want to go ahead and click the link right there. This shows you a time lapsed sort of version of the Mongol Empire year by year. It gives you a sense of one, how quickly it expands, two, how far it goes, and three, all the complexity connected with how the empire sort of splits apart slowly but surely. Some of you might remember Dante's Inferno and how Dante couldn't navigate all the circles of hell without some kind of spiritual guide. In that case, the spiritual guide was the Roman poet Virgil. Well, we have to explore the history of the Mongol Empire. So when I started looking for spiritual guides to navigate us through that, I looked through a lot of job applications, but I decided that the best possible spiritual guide would be, well, you guessed it, Genghis Khan.
Дэлхийд дахныг морин нуруунд дээрээс ижлэх амар. Харин дэлхийд дахныг морин нуруунд дээрээс жасаж үл болмой.
Why, thank you, Genghis. Yes, this is a new shampoo. So let's take a look at the 1200s, specifically pre-Mongol Eurasia. So if you look at Eurasia, specifically areas of like Central Asia, including modern-day Russia, there's no one all-powerful state. In fact, a lot of this territory right here is mostly unoccupied and not really organized into any particular state. Power is divided amongst empires like the Karakitai Khaganate, the Cuman Khanate. It's just very, very dispersed. Now, if you also think about it, through this area is possibly one of the most profitable lifelines on planet Earth. That is, of course, the Silk Road. It goes out from China through Western China into important and significant cities like Samarkand. And basically what happens is even though you may have not heard of organizations like the Cuman Khanate or the Karakitai Khaganate, the fact is that small states like these happen to have veto power over the entirety of the Silk Road, possibly. So let's talk about the neighborhood that the Mongols occupy. So this area right here is called the steppe. These are basically dry grasslands at pretty high elevations. So just to give you an idea, while the steppe is ideal for things like animal grazing, that kind of thing, it's not particularly well suited for growing crops. To the north, you have the wastelands of Siberia, where it's really cold, and to the south, you mostly have the Gobi Desert, where it's really hot. Both are equally inhospitable. Now, the steppe could be bitterly cold, and the Mongol horses, as well as the Mongol people, were pretty well adapted to succeed in those harsh environments. So if we look at Mongol society, you have nomadic tribes, really. Occasionally, they might come together to go to war, but the history of the Mongol people has been one of unification followed by periods of division. So they live in these little tents called yurts, and they're constantly migrating in search of land for their animals to graze. So this includes, of course, goats, sheep, but most importantly for the Mongols, the horse. So they subsisted on a high protein diet of meat and milk from herded animals, and they would trade hides and dairy products for jewelry and, very importantly, weapons, as well as cloth. So as we talked about, the tribes combined during war and when threatened, but also Mongol tribes fought pretty continuously with other Mongol tribes. In contrast to their Chinese neighbors in the south, women had a fairly robust role in Mongol society. They were allowed to speak in tribal councils, and the Mongols tracked lineage through the mother's descent. Being a nomadic society and subsisting on meat, the Mongols were very, very good hunters, specifically with short bows as well as some spears. Now, the thing is, of course, is that if you are a hunter, kind of trying to root out and surround, trap, and then kill game, the skill set that you learn as a hunter is fairly similar to the skill set that you learn in warfare. It's just that in warfare, you're game tends to be more protected, more armored, and they can also fight back. Mongol horses were very different than the gigantic war horses favored, for example, in Western Europe. They tended to be small, very quick mares. And I mean, just think about this. You're going at high speeds on a horse, you're constantly bobbing up and down, your thighs are probably killing you. And to be a Mongol fighter, you still had to be proficient at aiming your bow at a target and taking it down while constantly bobbing up and down. So to be a Mongol fighter, you had to be, and also, by the way, being a Mongol hunter, you had to master this skill set. Now, these are the people that will eventually conquer over 1/3 of the surface of planet Earth. The largest land based empire in human history has not been matched. So the question is, how are they able to do it? Well, to a certain extent, it's because of individual combat capability, but that only goes so far. So you not only have to have all the muscles and all the reflexes, but you have to have some degree of brain power. So the Mongols are what I would call instinctual tacticians. These are not people who are traditionally educated. And so, of course, your Confucian bureaucrats would look down at them, only to eventually be forced to look up to them when conquered by them. So the Mongols were very good at employing a set number of tactics and employing them very well. So, for example, the Mongols were excellent at what we would call kiting.
Fight your way to victory using the Han civilization. Use the keyboard for ground attacks to maintain distance from your enemies. Drive them to frustration until they rage quit. It's all about smart moves and quick thinking. Good luck and have patience.
So if you didn't catch what was going on there, or just don't understand what kiting is, so what that would involve is the Mongols would send in advanced parties of scouts or small groups of light cavalry. They would go and harass the enemy with basically short bow and javelin attacks. The enemy would get really annoyed. They would send in their forces to chase after them. The Mongols would then retreat, and in the process of retreating, they would lure the enemy into Mongol reinforcements, usually consisting of like heavier cavalry. Then the two Mongolian formations would basically surround the enemy and cut them to pieces. And the Mongols would rinse and repeat this time and time again and get very, very good at it. Now, because the Mongols were nomads, they had to sort of move with their animals, which also meant that the entire society had to move, which means that Mongols wanted their kids to basically learn important survival skills at a very early age. You might teach your kid to read and write. They're going to teach their kids how to, shoot a bow from distances of up to 350 yards away, for example. So this meant that even untrained Mongol warriors had a lifestyle that basically made them accustomed to hardship and difficulty, as well as giving them the basic skills that they would need to be warriors eventually. Mongol armies were almost entirely mounted, which means that they were basically all cavalry. This is what enabled them to eventually travel up to 11 million miles in total. So it made the Mongol armies incredibly quick. They could outmaneuver their opponents. And that being said, just because they're all on horseback doesn't necessarily mean that they're good warriors. So the Mongols had a very strict warrior code that really emphasize bravery, and they do take it to extremes. Debatably very similar to the samurai, actually. So soldiers that deserted would be executed on sight. The other thing that they eventually adopted is a system whereby if a soldier in a unit of 10 was found to have deserted, the other 9 soldiers in the unit would actually be executed. So, in other words, it basically meant that if you decided to be selfish, you would basically condemn all your comrades to death. This also means that Mongol units had to be pretty tight-knit because you might think that Jim the Mongol, I'm sure that's a traditional Mongol name, you might think he has bad breath, and you might want him to, amend that status, but you're afraid if you do that, you're afraid if you pick fights with Jim, well, what if he decides to desert and basically condemns all of you to a long, slow, painful death? So obviously there are built-in incentives to ensure that Mongol units stay close together. The Mongols were really exceptional at using other things beyond tools on the battlefield to help them win. They used spies and informants to create maps of areas they were going to invade. And of course, they eventually were very flexible in adopting sophisticated technology. Like a lot of exceptional empire builders, like, for example, the Romans and the Macedonians, on the one hand, they very much had pride in their own martial traditions and abilities. However, they also understood and recognized excellence when they saw it. And just because they were horse nomads from the steppe did not mean that they looked down upon technology. And eventually they will adopt things like battering rams, cannons, catapults, flaming arrows, and other gunpowder-based weapons. So the Mongols are a strong people who, of course, respect strength. So the question is, who could be strong enough to basically mold this very diverse and very robust group of people into a force that can conquer the world? And that person, of course, is Genghis Khan, who we'll talk about next time.